Thus far, throughout Digimon Adventure, every child has had his or her chance to shine in a spotlight episode, except for Joe and Takeru. Now, Takeru will have to wait a bit on that. Patamon's evolution is reserved for the arc's finale. Joe's time in the spotlight will be featured here in Episode 7. And after covering that much, we'll head straight into Episode 8 to meet the main villain of the File Island arc, Devimon. At this point in the show, we're beginning to shift gears. No pun intended. Digimon Adventure is progressing out of a struggle for survival into something more purposeful. The mettle of the children has been proved thus far against the rigors of File Island. But the children are still unaware of who or what brought them there in the first place, and why. Now, Koshiro seems to have figured some things out, what with his sleuthing at Andramon's factory, yet none can even imagine what will be unveiled over the course of the journey forward. As Episode 7 begins, we see the children have entered the winter region of File Island, and so much is covered by snow. Cavalier as ever, Taichi declares that they should have a snowball fight. Evidently, none of the children are aware that the mysterious black gears that they've been discovering so far are also soaring overhead, Devimon's oppressive hand extending its reach across File Island. No, the children do not suspect a thing. They're in good spirits here. They just want to play around as kids are ought to do. And that's not such a bad thing, right? Well, Joe grumpily protests these antics. Being the eldest, he takes on an air of skepticism and pessimism. Rewatching Digimon Adventure as an adult has me liking Joe far more than when I watched the show as a child. That, and I believe the original Japanese version makes the characters a bit more realistic. But the reason Joe is a compelling character is because he is markedly flawed, and therefore instills within one's audience a desire to see him overcome what ails him. A personal struggle encountered by even a fictional character, if well written, may also become one the audience may directly relate to. In other words, Joe's struggle easily becomes our struggle, and so one may readily live vicariously through him. While Joe might think himself a realist, his negativity does not rub well with the others, and that is altogether understandable. The other children do not see Joe as a true beacon for leadership, like they do Taichi. The fact of the matter is that Taichi hardly, if ever, complains. Taichi simply takes life as it comes at him and doesn't flinch. Joe, on the other hand, lacks the backbone required to support his ego. That isn't to say that Joe is a complete sellout, but he certainly does not establish himself as someone to be relied upon in a pinch. And true, while Yamato and Sora have also shown a lack of self-confidence, even they have proven themselves capable when things go wrong. Likewise, Koshiro and Mimi have done their due diligence when the chips were down. And so Joe and Takeru are all that remain to induce a Digimon evolution. And consider how awkward that situation would be for Joe. Joe is the eldest, but is now competing against coming in last place with Takeru, the youngest. No doubt Joe's being a bit psychotic here is a result of his staving off his current embarrassment. However, this situation is also what will give Joe a sudden cause to prove himself. So how do we know that Joe lacks the characteristic assertiveness promoted by the likes of Taichi? Why has Joe fallen into obscurity? While he may project an image of maturity, his actions show him to be timid to the point of cowardly, compounded by the fact that he is not good at hiding his true self. One can compare Joe's situation with recent instances where Yamato and Sora have shown that they have flaws, but the two of them are adept at covering themselves. Sadly, Joe is not, and so finds himself on full display whenever he messes up. In fact, his focus on his own ego leaves him prone to drawing more attention to himself. When the children first arrived on File Island, Joe's first reaction was to run and scream. He lost his cool immediately when confronted with these alien creatures. True too, Taichi was surprised when he first discovered Koromon sitting atop his chest, but comparing his situation with Joe, Taichi quickly recovered and realized there was no danger. Next we have an instance where Joe was trying to divvy out their rations at the beach in Episode 2. Taichi, as we know, went under his nose and fed himself and Agumon. Now, in the interest of asserting some kind of authority, that was an opportunity for Joe to put his foot down and be an adult, telling Taichi off for being so selfish. However, Taichi was allowed to have his way, and later he seemed to be justified for it when he and Agumon defended everyone else from Shellmon. And meanwhile, what did Joe do? Alright, he tried to run away, and then was promptly hosed down from the side of a cliff. How embarrassing. And so true, while one may argue that Taichi did act selfishly, There's no deterring from the fact that he and Greymon were the ones who stood up and defeated Shellmon. The perception established is that Taichi knows what he's doing. Of course, Taichi is just as much a fish out of the water as the rest of the children. Yet the difference between him and the others is that he puts on enough of an air of confidence and know-how that following his lead just seems to make sense. And he gets results, of course. And so whether or not Joe is the eldest and is more or less experienced than Taichi is not the issue here. The fact of the matter is that the other children feel safe within Taichi's shadow, regardless of any personal feelings on the matter. Flocking to Taichi is only natural. Yamato, Sora, and Koshiro are all carrying emotional baggage from home. Yamato is dealing with his parents' divorce. Sora is at odds with her mother. Koshiro is coping with the fact that he was adopted. And Mimi is simply farther out of her comfort zone than she has ever been. For all parties, Taichi is a rock, a firm foundation for them to grab a hold and ride out the current storm. And Joe just hasn't shown he can provide the same in any instance, as much as he might try otherwise. So as the children journey throughout the snow-filled land, they're delighted to discover some hot springs. They make plans to have a bath, but find that the water is actually scalding, so they settle for relaxing in the surrounding steam. And here Joe finds grounds to complain about how easygoing everyone is being. He would rather everyone be present-minded and serious about the fact that they're still lost and far from civilization. Even so, none of the other children are beholden to him. Now, a lack of food is next on Joe's list of complaints, and yet he is shown up by none other than Takeru, who very quickly happens upon a conveniently placed home refrigerator. Lucky. And this only compounds Joe's current conundrum. As I said before, Joe truly is competing against last place and having his Digimon partner pop the cherry on an adult evolution. Poor Joe just can't catch a break. For even as he essentially tries to invent new problems to overcome, even the digital world itself seems set on trolling him by delivering everyone good fortune. Good fortune indeed, for even Joe's name is the only one among the children not based on kanji, related to luck. Creatively, the children erect a large stone plate and set a campfire beneath it, using it like an enormous frying pan. And there they cook a collection of eggs they had found in the refrigerator and share a meal together, one of the best they've had since they arrived. Sadly, the otherwise cheerful setting is broken by Joe, who remarks about how much he misses home. Everyone's face becomes downcast for a few moments until Sora tries to lighten the mood. She talks about seasonings and condiments. However, even in this instance, Joe cannot help but maintain a negative attitude. Finally, Gomamon chimes in, teasing Joe for his stubbornness. But this only gets Joe even more worked up to the extent that Yamato has to step in and calm him down. This is appropriate. Yamato would have the temerity to treat Joe this way, since, unlike Taichi, he has shown far more respect for Joe. However, instead of apologizing as he ought to do and rectify the situation, Joe snaps at Yamato and then wanders off to sulk. One should compare this instance to the confrontation around the campfire in episode 3. As we know, a fight nearly broke out between Taichi and Yamato, but they chose to let it go. There, Joe looked like he was about to break things up between them, but he remained silent. As much as Joe would like to be respected for his age, that same attitude should also entail a willingness to keep the peace if his friends are not getting along with each other. And now here in episode 7, Joe is the one coming in direct conflict with one of his friends. And here the other party just so happens to be his Digimon partner. None of that bodes well for one trying to set an example of maturity. Then evening approaches and Taichi and Yamato get into an argument about whether they ought to climb Infinity Mountain. Now, Infinity Mountain is the tallest peak on File Island. It resides in the exact middle. According to the Digimon partners, the mountain is inhabited by more ferocious Digimon than the children have encountered so far, and so scaling it would undoubtedly prove itself to be a treacherous endeavor. While Taichi seeks to better understand the lay of the land, Yamato urges caution. Note the respect that Yamato shows to Joe may be due this similarity in their personalities. Both boys have a high regard to the safety of others. In fact, if Joe were a bit more intelligent, he might have used this as an opportunity to denounce Taichi and side with Yamato, since they both would have been of one heart about this. However, in an effort to establish equilibrium between the two parties, Joe unwittingly becomes involved in their argument rather than solving anything. While Taichi never had any respect for Joe to begin with, Yamato's respect for him seems to have soured over their confrontation at dinner. Joe is then shown up by Sora, who butts in and breaks things up. She urges everyone to chill out and resolve everything in the morning. And while Taichi and Yamato are made to acquiesce, Joe is left dejected. Later that night, after everyone falls asleep, Joe resolves to scale Infinity Mountain all by himself. And in retrospect, this would have been the most prudent course of action for him to take at this point. For in this manner, Joe risks himself and nobody else. While Joe lacks Taichi's impulsiveness, he's not an absolute coward, and can certainly steel himself for what lies ahead. While seemingly driven to take action here, going out alone was still a decision Joe made for himself, yet soon finds he's not alone in this.
かっこつけちゃって。一人であの山へ行くつもりかい？
ゴマモン。
Gomamon holds the honor of being one of the more distinct Digimon partners in the show, almost entirely due how his personality contrasts with that of Joe. While he is making light of Joe's antics, Gomamon is also very much aware of how serious Joe is in this matter.
止めても無駄だぞ。
だろうね。さ、どうぞ。
Slowly but surely, this is what Joe seems to appreciate in his Digimon partner. That even though Gomamon can be a bit of a hard ass at times, the Digimon certainly means well, and has a heart to improve upon Joe in the process.
ついてくるな。僕は一人で行く。
別に、オイラもあの山に用があるんだ。
勝手にしろ。
And as they continue to climb the mountain, Joe and Gomamon are allowed a few moments to themselves, and they bond.
まったく、素直じゃないな、ジョーは。
何が？
一人じゃ心細かったんだろ？
バカ言うな。
いいっていいって、気にすんな。
And this is very much unlike Joe's initial encounter with Gomamon and the other Digimon in episode 1.
いざとなったら、オイラが手を貸してやるよ。
手？それ手だったの？
怒るよ。
冗談。どうした？
ジョーにも冗談が言えるんだ。
え？
なんでもない。さあ、行くぜ。
For what is perhaps the first moment since they met, Joe has now begun to regard Gomamon as he would a person, not some strange animal from another world.
結構やるじゃん。
ゴマモンもね。
Now their trek is interrupted when the mountain begins to quake, causing a rift on the face of a nearby cliff. Joe and Gomamon are then surprised to see a swarm of black gears released by the mountain's parting, and so they decide to investigate this further. Eventually they encounter Unimon, a mix between a unicorn and a Pegasus, complete with this red visor covering its eyes. Although initially cautious, Joe learns that the Unimon is docile, and Gomamon says that it is naturally friendly. However, as they talk with one another, one of the black gears hurtles toward Unimon and embeds itself within the creature's back. Enraged, Unimon then attacks Joe and Gomamon. Fortunately, the pair of them are saved by the timely arrival of Taichi and Sora. Their partners evolve, and Greymon and Bergermon do battle with Unimon. Yet Unimon proves far too quick for them to land any attacks. Eventually, Joe decides to take matters into his own hands. Literally. In an effort to dislodge the Black Gear himself, Joe leaps onto Unimon's back as the horse makes a pass below. Ultimately, while Joe fails to remove the gear, his action pushes Gomamon into evolving into a Kakumon, a mix between a walrus and a polar bear. Joe is then saved, and the Black Gear is summarily destroyed. And so at last Joe has been vindicated. And here Taichi even apologizes to him for being so dismissive the night before. Gomamon too has a newfound respect for Joe. Although he tries to tease Joe again here, Joe gives Gomamon all the credit, and even congratulates him with a formal handshake. Previously, Joe had made fun of Gomamon's paws, a clear-cut indication of how Joe saw his partner. Joe now regards Gomamon as he would one of his peers, a person due mutual respect. And perhaps as a callback to this very moment, these same paws will also dredge Joe from the waters of Odaiba, much later into the show. Episode 7 represents one of the pinnacle episodes of the season, and perhaps the franchise as a whole. Upon deepening the facets of the digital world, File Island's own mysteries continue to unfold, and will eventually lead to the children uncovering the sinister force orchestrating all these hideous schemes from afar. Yet here we also have a story that illustrates one of the weaker characters of Digimon Adventure, rising to the occasion and proving himself. Joe's arrogance rubs everyone the wrong way and only leads to further problems down the road. As a result of his pride, Joe is continually humiliated by various circumstances. That, and Joe still has yet to bring his Digimon partner to evolve. As Joe pushes outwardly against the world, so too does the world push back. And unlike Taichi, Joe isn't used to all the pushback, and so whines and complains. Where Gomamon shines as a character is that he is far from frivolous. He doesn't see fit to bear any kind of sagely advice that would give Joe a straight answer to his problems. Instead, Gomamon mocks Joe's concerns in such a manner as to humble him. In other words, Gomamon treats Joe just as Joe acts, like a child. And he does this because, for all intents and purposes, Joe deserves it. However, as we know, Joe takes Gomamon's teasing far too personally, when the reality is that Gomamon is only trying to improve upon his human partner. Now, while it may be too extreme to compare Gomamon's personality to that of a drill sergeant, that is the general idea here. Joe is essentially being torn down so that Gomamon might eventually build him back up. This is why even your best of friends may tease and poke fun at you for whatever you do, especially if you're the kind of person who projects the kind of behavior that Joe does. The thing is, humiliation isn't always a bad thing. Humiliation is derived from the word humility, which is seen as a virtue. Now, if you're familiar with my videos or have watched my Digimon Adventure playlist, you may have seen my original video covering this episode. In reality, there's always more that can be said about any given episode, but this one in particular has stuck with me. And I believe this is wholly due to the rocky companionship that Joe and Gomamon have with one another. The magic of this relationship is within its being intentionally written as unideal. When the writers set about establishing Joe and Gomamon, they did not do so on the premise these two would ever come to an absolute understanding of one another. On that subject matter, the only two children who really get to that point with their Digimon partners are Taichi and Yamato. For the most part, as far as this first season is concerned, the rest of the children just never get there. And true, there are stark differences between Sora and Piyomon, Koshiro and Tentomon, Mimi and Palmon, Takeru and Patamon. The personality clash between Joe and Gomamon is far more distinct, and therefore more interesting. And by the end of the day, all one can say is that Joe and Gomamon respect each other, even if they don't like each other. Many writers may balk at the prospect of having characters be genuinely rude or spiteful to each other, despite the fact that this is how people interact with each other on a regular basis. Generally speaking, people don't get along with each other. That's normal. Characters whose interactions are not ideal come across as far more genuine, which is exactly why I relish these kinds of interactions. People may say they don't like to argue or fight, but in reality, conflict is often necessary and even good for healthy relationships. While conflict may breed contempt, in equal measure, people are also apt to learn how to love one another. Love, as powerful a force as it is, entails either party enacts great emotional pressure on another. And that's what's inspiring about Joe's journey here. While the climb up Infinity Mountain is a symbol of Joe overcoming his own fears and worries, Gomamon's joining him also entails Joe has to overcome his prejudice against his partner. Ultimately, Gomamon proves to be exactly the kind of friend that Joe needed in his life. And how lucky for Joe that this just so happens to be his Digimon partner as well. In effect, Gomamon shows himself to be the only Digimon partner who acts like a sibling to his human partner, almost like a brother. None of the other Digimon partners resort to that kind of behavior. Interesting also is the choice of antagonist in this episode. In mythology, a unicorn is often depicted as being an unyielding and indomitable creature, and so would appropriately represent the hurdle Joe must currently face. Naturally, Joe's attempt to pry the gear from its back further symbolizes his willingness to overcome his trepidations. Funnily, Joe is thrown from the back of this wild unicorn only to land upon yet another unicorn, so to speak, as Ikakumon too sports a horn upon his head. And very much unlike a majestic unicorn, Ikakumon is big and bloated, the picture of the awkwardness of Joe's success. Joe's entire predicament is defined by his ineptness at human interaction, which has, unfortunately, resulted in all the others disrespecting his social standing. He isn't given an easy way out of this predicament either. There's no life lesson to be learned here, in other words, which makes his struggle transpire as it would naturally for any real person. In life, the answers to our problems do not always readily present themselves to us. Or even if they do present themselves, we are not always readily aware of what we must do. This is all what improves upon how well-written Joe and Gomamon's relationship is. As I said before, Gomamon does not give Joe any sagely advice or wisdom that would instantaneously change Joe. Gomamon simply follows Joe up a mountain and the two make casual conversation. They become friends. In the end, that is all Joe really needed, someone who would listen to him and converse with him.
ありがとうゴマモン君のおかげで助かったよ
And so episode 7 comes to a close. Taichi, Sora, and Joe reach a high point atop Infinity Mountain. They're not at the peak, but they're high enough to get a decent view of the entire island and the surrounding ocean. Much to their disappointment, File Island reveals itself to be completely isolated, with no other land in sight. Before I move on, I'm going to take a quick moment to encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so. As far as I know, this will help the channel's visibility on YouTube. In addition, I do have a Patreon and a Cash App. The links for both may be found in the video's description. You may think of them like an online tip jar. None of my videos are monetized, so this is the only method by which I can benefit financially from them. And for everyone sticking with my Digimon series, I want to thank you so much and would greatly appreciate your continued support of my endeavors here. And now, without further ado, we move on to episode 8. Here we are introduced to two warriors, Leomon and Ogremon. The following scene includes much of what is relatively known as world building. I only take note of this because all this scene is meant to do is establish these two characters within an allotted time frame. Dialogue, therefore, is highly expositional and otherwise detracts from what would otherwise constitute a normal casual conversation. However, we do have a viewing audience present, and therefore the dialogue is edited in a manner by which we can readily understand these two creatures and what petty strife currently motivates them to action. And so Leomon is a beast-man Digimon, half man, half lion, whereas Ogremon is, as his name would indicate, an ogre, and not your friendly Shrek-type ogre, not yet anyway. And about the slopes of Infinity Mountain these two Digimon have taken to fighting one another. Ongoing is their expository dialogue. Leomon, being half lion, is driven by a sense of nobility, a code of honor. Ogremon, however, opposes him. Leomon is set out to find and eliminate the source of the Black Ears, as he has been witness to the kind of evil they have wrought. Ogremon, on the other hand, has no set reason for opposing Leomon other than for the sake of predetermined rivalry. In other words, the pair of them have been fighting each other ever since they can remember. Note that Leomon attends to a primary purpose entailed by his inherent sense of nobility, whereas Ogremon does not. The rivalry between him and Leomon is all Ogremon really has, and this will constitute a character crisis for Ogremon later on in the show, which will also be answered by Mimi, of all people. And this facet is interesting as it expounds upon the inevitable purposelessness of evil. The forces of darkness throughout Digimon Adventure seem to have no real goal other than to undermine the forces of light. Left at a stalemate, Leomon and Ogremon are then spoken to by a cold voice echoing about Infinity Mountain. The two of them then take pause for a moment to listen as the voice tells them to cooperate. Not long after, a sinister creature appears before them, Devimon. And note how Devimon is just suddenly there. No semblance of where he came from. It's not like he faded into existence, nor arrived via a trail of smoke or something. Leomon and Ogremon simply turn around and suddenly, he's just there. Or is he? One cannot be certain. But such is Devimon's nature, that of deception. Even as Leomon and Ogremon behold him here, one must ask if that is truly Devimon, or if this visage is only an illusion. Devimon looks like an albino man with fangs, wearing a shoddy, skin-tight, bat-themed unitard. He looks altogether too human, save two hideously elongated arms which are crossed over his chest, in semblance of one laid to rest within a coffin. His appearance runs alongside an ongoing theme promoted by many of the show's villains, a human figure endowed with enigmatic attire. The symbol emblazoned upon Devimon's chest also recurs throughout the Digimon franchise as well. Several Digimon wear that symbol, and most, if not all of them, are evil. Devimon announces that the chosen children have arrived, and here we get the first utterance of a long-standing title that will echo throughout Digimon Adventure. Erabarashi Kodomodachi. This is a significant moment in time for Digimon Adventure. This is the first time in the show that the children's collective identity is referred to, and therefore solidified within the minds of the audience. Devimon's dialogue also infers that in the process of his taking over File Island, his efforts so far have been stymied thanks to the actions of the chosen children. And what that means is that ever since Episode 4, Devimon has been active, even if unseen. Now the noble Leomon hears Devimon's words and so naturally attacks him. Yet this proves fruitless. Devimon's body reveals itself to be an illusory projection. After he mocks Leomon, Devimon then strikes him from behind. Dark power then infects Leomon's body, possessing it, making the noble lion a vessel for Devimon's bidding. Ogremon, on the other hand, does not receive the same treatment, which makes sense as he has already shown where his allegiances lie. Summarily, Devimon bids his two new agents to go and fight the children, who are at this moment still scaling Infinity Mountain. And so Leomon and Ogremon ambush the children, catching them in a pincer movement. Taichi and company are forced to defend themselves, with no means to escape other than to tumble off the mountain. Meanwhile, Devimon is content to watch the battle from afar, and he remarks on the strength of the children as their Digimon partners evolve. And Patamon, of course, is still the odd one out, as Takeru never received his moment in the spotlight. Soon realizing his two minions will not prevail against the children, Devimon improvises a rock slide to crush them, but not before removing Leomon and Ogremon from the fight. While the rocks are destroyed by the partner Digimon, the entire excursion leaves them heavily fatigued. They've also never had to evolve more than once in a day. Even so, twice a day means they are improving. Now here one might have assumed that Devimon would have sent his minions back in to finish the job, but he doesn't do that. Instead, he makes a more elaborate plan. In case one thinks this is unpractical, the way I see it is that Devimon is acting out a sense of caution. And there's two reasons for this. The first is that he doesn't really know what he's dealing with, and so his being wary of the children is pragmatic. Secondly, he's naturally a coward, and that falls in line with the nature of evil hiding its face. And so because Devimon does not reveal himself, the children are left to assume that the rock slide happened naturally, and so don't readily suspect they are actively being spied upon. Even so, Taichi at the very least is somewhat suspicious. From there, however, the children choose to descend from Infinity Mountain, and they head back into the forest. Now, seemingly at random, they discover a mansion, and here it's noteworthy that Joe, of all of them, is eager to get in and go exploring, a huge contrast from his stick-in-the-mud attitude from the previous episode. What's ironic about this instance is that, of all times to be cautious, this will actually turn out to be the most appropriate time. Taichi, on the other hand, is exceedingly wary of the mansion, and with good reason, seeing as how he didn't spot it during his brief survey. Nevertheless, the children do take refuge inside. Now, prominently displayed within the mansion is a painting of an angel, which Joe takes as a good omen, although Taichi remains skeptical. Now here one might see Taichi's attitude as being detrimental to his otherwise reckless nature, but something more fundamental is at play here. Contextually, the children are falling into a trap designed by the forces of evil, and Taichi's spirit is one that has always been opposed to such. Something beyond Taichi's experience is speaking through him at this point in time, which is interesting in that he is acting more like Joe, and Joe is acting more like him. And why this is significant will be covered in much larger detail after I've gone through summarizing the events of this episode. Otherwise, what's really important to note here is that this difference between Taichi and Joe is yet another key to understanding why Taichi is the leader of the group and Joe is not. So, as the children explore the mansion's interior, they find a dining room, and it is complete with a feast. And all but Joe is willing to remark on the absurdity of this happenstance. Once again, the exact opposite of how things played out when they discovered the fridge with the eggs inside the day before. Moreover, such a feast so readily prepared affords the children the option to forego what they had resorted to before, namely foraging for food and water about the digital world. They could have otherwise gone fishing, started a campfire, made their own food. But here, having been offered the tantalizing temptation before them, they partake in it, and even Taichi acquiesces, in spite of it all. As such, the last bastion has fallen. At the end of all things, a miracle will be required to save the chosen children from certain doom.
In addition to the food, the mansion also generously provides the children with a bathhouse, which they very eagerly make use of. Here, their literal nakedness further symbolizes the children having been made vulnerable, easily taken advantage of by the powers of darkness. Nevertheless, any ill-begotten schemes are no longer suspected. As such, the proverbial flies have eagerly made their way into the spider's parlor. After their bath, the children then don some conveniently placed bathrobes and head straight for the mansion's bedroom. Now, because they arrived in the digital world in a state of destitution, this naturally makes the mansion's amenities all the more worthwhile, especially as the children lay themselves down in proper beds this time and are no longer forced to sleep outside. Now at this point in the show, 5 whole days have passed since the children first arrived in this strange new world, and here, being surrounded by the luxuries of the mansion, the reality of their situation hits them. They're no longer regularly afforded these kinds of comforts, the cushion of modern civilization. They're far from home, no parents, no adults, no Tokyo. In the end, all the children have is each other and their Digimon partners, for now at least. Yet all that is about to change.
As they fall asleep, Devimon invades the mansion. And there's an excellent shot of him phasing through the painting of the angel, literally demonstrating the idiom about the devil in the details.
And placing a picture of an angel on the wall will turn out to be a stroke of diabolic genius. Devimon, being a fallen angel, would therefore know he could readily deceive the children into dropping their guard, in the presence of a creature renowned for its natural benevolence.
In equal measure, this makes Devimon out to be both utterly tragic and despicable at the same time. Tragic in that he was formerly a being of goodness and righteousness, and despicable in that as a fallen creature he would go so far as to use the semblance of his previous incarnation to deceive others. If we look at this theologically, as is appropriate given the context of angels and demons, we must acknowledge that there are those who believe it impossible for anyone to fall from such a status as may have once befitted a being like Devimon. And true, at one point in time, Devimon was a being who espoused the holy light of God and experienced the gifts of heaven and shared that holiness with others. And perhaps, at one point in time, Devimon was made fully aware of the kind of world that would come about as a result of his goodwill and tenderness. Yet despite all that, he deserted his original purpose, to chase after vanity. As a result, Devimon not only fell, but he now disgraces his former self by using this angelic image to harm. As a result of all this, it is no wonder the children would eventually find it appropriate to destroy him, as Devimon had proved himself a creature beyond redemption. Now, because Digimon Adventure is still a show tailored for children, the horror of what is about to happen is watered down a bit, but with purpose. Here we get a scene where Taichi needs to take Agumon to use the bathroom. And of course, because none of the food they ate was actually real, Agumon's little trip here proves futile, because he discovers he can't poop, so instead he farts a whole lot. This is a genuinely comedic moment as Agumon's awkwardness foils Ogremon's ambush. What this means is that Devimon's plan to stealthily kill all the children in their sleep is somewhat disrupted here thanks to Agumon's little farting episode. Since having his presence made known, Devimon shatters his illusion, revealing all, and so the mansion vanishes. An interesting touch here, however, is that the wall that held the portrait of the angel still remains, albeit the frame is now pitch black. Yet another symbolic allusion to Devimon, the fact that the angel is gone but darkness remains in its absence. The rest of the children also awake, horrified to discover that the food, the baths, and the bathrobes, none of it was real. At Taichi's side, Agumon then winces, hunger pains renewed as the illusion dissipates. In his state, he won't be defending Taichi anytime soon. In demonstration of his raw power, Devimon then telepathically lifts the rest of the children into the air, and they cling to their beds. Everyone is at his mercy. In anger, Taichi demands to know the reason for all this, to which Devimon simply replies,
お前たち選ばれし子供たちだからだ。
選ばれし子供たち?
Well, there are those who might see this characterization as clinching any nuance to who or what Devimon is. I have a mind to say this truly is all one needs to know about him. Devimon is a devil, and so readily announces that it is within his current nature to oppose the will of God. His will, therefore, is set against those chosen by God. Arrogantly, Devimon proceeds to tear File Island asunder, revealing a massive network of black gears that lay dormant inside. Believing he is truly one, he announces that File Island has been taken over by the Black Gears, and that he will corrupt the rest of the digital world following the defeat of the chosen children and their Digimon. And then at Devimon's beck and call, a possessed Leomon advances on Taichi, and poor Agumon, having been left hungry and weak, is unable to retaliate. All seems lost until the unthinkable occurs. Now, despite everything he had made himself out to be, Devimon's gestures will prove far too cocky in the long run. Even as he tosses the beds about in the air with his telekinesis, one of them unintentionally crashes nearby, and as fate would have it, Taichi's Digivice falls from it and lands at Leomon's foot. The Digivice then glows with a bright light, which exorcises Devimon's influence from Leomon. Made afraid, Devimon reacts immediately and attempts to kill the remaining children by causing them to fall from the air, but Leomon quickly interrupts this action. As a result, the rest of the children are scattered, each of them is set to land on the shattered pieces of File Island. And finally, Taichi is also rescued from danger, having been thrown onto his own islet thanks to Leomon's efforts. And as said islet carries Taichi and Agumon safely away, Leomon pleads with them to survive and save this world. Unfortunately, Leomon is then left to succumb to Devimon yet again, who reaches out and infects him with his evil. Nevertheless, Devimon is set back and must resort to taking out the children one by one, a ploy he does see as being far easier now that they're all separated. And so the episode ends. Expertly, the writers have crafted a villain whose very presence is more than a mere obstacle to circumvent. What we have here is a call to purpose, for which the children were brought into the digital world in the first place. They discover they were not brought here simply to wander about aimlessly, fighting whatever beast stood in their way. No, the children have a role to play in a grand scheme, for a great evil permeates throughout this world. Devimon represents just the tip of the iceberg. The stakes, as they are, have risen. In episode 5, I mentioned how Koshiro found it possible to manipulate the digital world via his laptop computer. And so here one wonders if the writers were playing with the idea of even those such as Devimon happening upon the codes and algorithms that would be necessary to manipulate the digital world as well. The illusory mansion and Devimon's other manifestations would therefore be a result of his mastery of those programs. He would be bending the world itself to his will. And given how prevalent Devimon's influence was on File Island, one has to wonder if the shattered pieces of the island had reached the mainland. There's no telling what kind of evil would have been wrought as a result of the server continent and beyond becoming infected with the Black Gears. There's a possibility that Devimon would have become even more powerful than Edamon, Vamdemon, or even the Dark Masters. Devimon's introduction and vendetta are very excellently set up here. He works from the shadows, cautious and calculating, preferring to act through other Digimon rather than engage the children and their Digimon partners up close and personally. And even as he is one who covers his face beneath a mask, Devimon's black gears lie in wait under the crust of File Island. Devimon hides. Devimon's suit is a facade that covers his true nature, that of a fallen angel. And as will also be the case with other villains throughout the show, Devimon is made to appear more like a man masquerading as a monster than as a monster itself. Unlike Leomon, for example, who is highly anthropomorphic, Devimon severely lacks any true animal-like qualities. Even his elongated arms can be counted as human, if abnormal. Aside from his arms, most of what makes Devimon unique is his stitched unitard. And as I've continually noted, Devimon's eyeline and most of his facial features are covered by a mask, thereby hiding whatever hideous face resides beneath it. And incidentally, the whole mask motif is carried on by the likes of Vamdemon, Paimon, and even Apocalypmon. Evil has a natural tendency to hide its face. That's why masks are a significant detail. Now let's break that down and go way back to the beginning, Book of Genesis, in particular the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. There was a point in time where Adam and Eve were naked, but they felt no shame. And many theologians have assumed that this was because they were clothed in God's glory. However, when they eat of the fruit of the tree that God forbade them, Adam and Eve then realize that they are naked, and so attempt to hide themselves. And so sin is naturally associated with shame. Sin gives cause for us to hide ourselves. But something also noteworthy is the fact that after Adam and Eve were banished from the garden, that God generously fashioned tunics for them, made from skin. Now if we take this story of the fall of man into consideration here, and apply its meaning to Digimon Adventure, I've assumed a similar outline tailors Devimon's own backstory. After all, he is classified as a fallen angel, which means he was ousted from his former glory, much like Adam and Eve were banished from the garden. And like Adam and Eve, perhaps Devimon was stripped of his glory, left naked and exposed, and so had to resort to grafting his own set of clothes using skin or leather. From there, his ill-shod bat suit with its loose stitching and bandaging tells its own story. Either Devimon fashioned this himself or angrily tore apart the tunic that he was given by God after he was banished. But the mask is particularly significant. Evil must hide its face, because sin is inherently shameful. And coincidentally, Devimon robs the chosen children of their clothing after he successfully deceives them. What also plays on this theme of hiding is all the drama that the children are embroiled in. Yamato is left to deal with the baggage of his parents' divorce. Sora has a strained relationship with her mother. Koshiro is made to cope with the fact that he was adopted. Joe is struggling to live up to the high expectations of his parents. And for each of these cases, the children have learned how to hide, such as Yamato's sequestering himself to play his harmonica, or Koshiro's burying himself in his computer. They're all essentially hiding their shame, the shame of their life situations. Situations that are not necessarily their faults, yet still induce shame upon their livelihoods nonetheless. Still, the mission of the chosen children is closely tied to their digivices, which will literally serve as lights shining in the darkness. and therefore all who hide within the darkness will be exposed. Appropriately symbolized by Devimon's influence having been exorcised from Leomon when Taichi's Digivice landed nearby. The message is clear. Light must be allowed to shine, else evil will eventually overshadow all. I've also spoken much about Taichi's leadership, and how his leadership is transcendent. It goes beyond applying a subset of terminology that can readily understand how it works. Understanding the true nature of leadership may come with experience. However, if you're listening to my commentary trying to understand the nature of leadership, please realize that leadership is far more than a collection of traits and skills you adopt. And I do realize there are many a book, a speech, a commentary, etc. that may try to capture exactly what leadership is. But sadly, all of these will fall short of reality. In reality, leadership is not inherent within us. It is bestowed upon us, which means it's an attribute that is largely outside our realm of control. Leadership is something that you nor I can ever attain by force of will, and to try otherwise would essentially make us tyrants, appropriately attributable to our current antagonist, Devimon. At its core, this is why I love Digimon Adventure. The writers seem to capture this mysterious energy that is innate within leadership. I realize that many may see leadership under different terms, but the reality is that leadership is a facet that is completely outside our realm of control. Otherwise, we could control the world. And this is why Devimon is the perfect antagonist here. For Devil is the peak incarnation of a creature who desires to escape the constraints of goodness and righteousness, and achieve some false semblance of freedom as a result. In any media made for children, what better villain might be erected than the very picture of what sinister tendencies are also rife within ourselves? And again, I believe this is why Joe could never achieve the same status of respect and admiration as Taichi. While one cannot deny Joe wanted to protect others and ensure their safety, he could not help himself from inventing artificial problems to overcome in order to justify himself. The thing about Taichi, as opposed to Joe, is that Taichi respects the rest of his friends to the extent that he allows them their freedom. He will protect them when they need protection, of course, but he's never overbearing, and he's never controlling. But Joe is overbearing and controlling, and therefore his semblance of leadership is bordering on the tyrannical. Indeed, Joe's want to control his friends is comparable to Devimon's infecting other Digimon with black gears, and even possessing Leomon. Essentially, Devimon is asserting his own will as being primary, while all others are secondary. In essence, isn't Joe's attitude the same? Now, of course, none of this is to say that Joe is the same as Devimon, but this is a question of thematics. With regard to all I have said in this video, please take a moment to realize the ease by which I conduct my commentary about Digimon Adventure, and how straightforward I am about any given topic. And I do this out of respect for the people who made the show in the first place, in addition to anyone who believes that Digimon Adventure is more than a commercial product made for mindless consumption. That being said, I have found on occasion that when I discuss the merits of this show with others, I'm approached with an air of skepticism. The assumption a lot of people have about a show like this is that it is of lesser worth than other forms of art because it's a cartoon made for kids. Nevertheless, I make no apologies. Some may say I have gone above and beyond the call here, but if so, then so much the better. Note I tailor some of my commentary with addendums like, I don't know if the writers intended this, but... and then I'll talk about symbolism or meaning. And true, one may find easy answers to many questions throughout interviews with authors, directors, or artists, but what's more interesting to me is to investigate those things which the creators themselves might not even have realized they imbued within their work. There are facets about ourselves that we exude without our even knowing it, and those facets may often be revealed through the things that we make. For instance, Joe and Gomamon may have encountered any adult-level Digimon on Infinity Mountain, but the fact that it was a unicorn has more symbolic significance, as it directly relates to Joe's personal struggles. However, what's far more interesting is how the writers decided to utilize Devimon within the story. The original Virtual Pet Simulator featured Devimon as such. Your child-level Digimon could evolve into Devimon just as easily as it would a Greymon or Tyrannomon, and so one would assume Devimon was of the same stock, and he could have very well been written as being simply another adult-level Digimon roaming File Island, just another monster of the day to defeat, another stepping stone along the children's ongoing journey.
However, the writers extended their reach outside the finite boundaries of the virtual pet simulator, and they turned Devimon into a creature of cunning and ambition, a force to be reckoned with, all despite his adult-level status. As such, the encounter with Devimon turns into far more than a zero-sum game. The event has more poetic significance, more meaning is involved. Devimon therefore proves to be extraordinarily deceptive, a master of illusions, one who strikes from the shadows. And so all his ill-gotten tactics come naturally insofar as he is a fallen angel, and with all his black gears scattered about File Island, he manages to maintain omnipresence and invisibility simultaneously. Everything about Devimon is iconic. He is a clear and present evil that must be overcome by the forces of good. In the end, his defeat will mean far more than simply doing away with another monster. It will also herald the end of tyranny and a fulfillment of special purpose. I also made special note of Devimon's calling the children chosen, because the English dub calls the characters digidestined.
The thing is, chosen children is far more practical given it is less specific to the franchise. Therefore, the terminology in the original version makes for a far more immersive world.
Now here one could argue that the word Digivice and the obligatory Mon suffix added to all the Digimon names are also blatant franchise projections. But my point is that the dialogue throughout the show is not written so obtusely as to constantly remind one's audience that they are actively partaking in a commercial product. That's important because an audience may therefore become far more immersed in the ongoing story and the world it takes place in, mostly because the story is not obliged to acknowledge a metaphysical state. And if we're speaking practically, a discernible reason as to why the digital world inhabitants would even call themselves Digimon is simple. It's colloquial. As we know, when the creatures introduced themselves to the children for the first time, they clarified that they were
Digital monster?
and that's appropriate insofar that is literally what they are. And so Digimon, therefore, becomes a natural shortening of those two words. This is also where the English dub gets it wrong, for there's no practical reason why the word digital would ever need to be paired with destined, since destiny is an idea, it's not a physical state of being.
I've assumed that the word digidestined was attributed to make the English dub a bit more frivolous. In other words, don't take this too seriously, kids. In addition, the word also serves as an unnecessary callback to the name of the franchise. Much like the Pokemon series includes terms such as Pokeball, Pokédex, or Pokemart. In the Japanese version of Digimon Adventure, however, all the terminology is far more practical. I'm not sure how else to say it, but digidestined just sounds silly, and it is a wonder the characters do not cringe as they say it. Now, for anyone who would say that preferring the original version of the English dub is a matter of personal preference, and that any differentiating between the two is just nitpicking, I might agree if my preference was based on the quality of the voice actors speaking the lines. However, I must insist that when you start messing around with accuracy and translation, then one most certainly can objectively state that the dub tells a very different story from the original. And true, while both the original version of the show and the English dub tell the same general story, the finer details will still garner differing overall perceptions. But there, let's even talk about the voice acting.
それぐらいにしておく。これからお前たち二人は協力し合わねばならんのだからな。
この声はデビモン。
The original voice of Devimon by Kaneto Shiozawa provides an experience far different from that of Tom Weiner. Note Shiozawa's cold delivery.
子供たちだとまさか。
いささか倒すのに時間がかかりそうなのでな。
ジオキャン。何？
甘いな。そんなことで私が倒せるとでも思ったか。悪の洗礼を受けるの。
Does this not befit a creature whose tendency is to hide and lay traps for his prey? Shiozawa's voice lends to the idea that Devimon is a silent but deadly predator, not at all as bombastic as Tom Weiner makes him out to be.
I command that the two of you work together for me, not fight. You will work for me. I'll never do that. Neither will I. Be silent. It is the Digidestined kids who will be fighting. The Digidestined? Where are they? They're already here on Infinity Mountain. Now find them and destroy the entire group. Fist of the Beast King! Freeze, Leomon. I am not requesting your cooperation. I am demanding it. Prepare for the touch of evil. Now you will obey my every command.
In the long run, this kind of stuff does matter, insofar as how one is to regard this villain. On the one hand, Shiozawa's voice comes across as far more sinister, but natural.
想像以上の力だな。だが疲れている今なら倒すチャンスは十分ある。
He achieves a balance between Devimon's sublime humanity and the monster that he has become. On the other hand, Weiner's voice makes Devimon all the more cartoonish, thereby reducing his tonal worth as a villain. He's just something to be tossed away as one Saturday morning comes to a close.
I have no further use for this imaginary building.
For me, this is one of the main reasons why Adventure remains worthwhile. The fact that the Japanese voice actors never tried to make the characters out to be anything less than realistic.
Now, this is not to say that Weiner voices Devimon poorly, but rather that he does not capture any of the uniqueness that Shiozawa does. While one can say for sure that Weiner is playing alongside classic tropes about what a villain should sound like, I think that's all part of the problem. The voice he provides is far too generalized, and therefore throws us into the cushion of the familiar. On the other hand, Shiozawa's voice is like a frosted whisper, which, one may imagine, remarks on the soft-spoken tenderness of Devimon's previous incarnation. And as a result, the Japanese version of Devimon is far creepier, and therefore far more memorable.
おとなしく寝ておればいいものを。
お前はデビモンだ。
デビモン？
最強最悪のデジモンだよ。
夢はもう失われた。